Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. You know, folks, I, like everyone else yesterday, was somewhat astounded by the news that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. withdrew from the presidential race. And the second part of that, which was even more astounding, was the fact that he endorsed Trump. I was quite amazed at that. Breaking news: Robert F. Kennedy suspends presidential campaign and endorses Trump. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., of course, is the son of Robert F. Kennedy, the brother of President John F. Kennedy, both whom were assassinated. Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated on his campaign running for president. So many parallels here, except Robert F. Kennedy is from one of probably the most powerful Democratic family in the history of the United States. And not surprising so much that he withdrew again from the race. But the very surprising thing was that, again, he is endorsing Donald Trump. I think Mr. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is a Democrat in his ideology and most of his political thoughts. And if he's sincere based on the speeches he's given, that he's sort of soured on the party over the last few years over many different things, then I really applaud his integrity for going against the party and endorsing someone on the exact other side of the aisle, you know. And I'm sure he's not collecting many friends over this. In fact, he's probably collecting many, many enemies over this, including enemies within his own family. His family even made a statement against him about this endorsement, even about his campaign in running for president as a third-party candidate. I find that a bit, again, egregious without taking any sides. But why can't there be a third-party candidate? Isn't that best for democracy, that we have more than the two-party system that just controls everything? I think, to me, the answer is yes. I think that we need a third party. We need a party that can keep the other two parties honest, because right now they control everything. But you can see the pitfalls and the pressures and the mountains he had to climb in order to get on the ballot, and indeed to get Secret Service protection, with which they denied him during almost the entire part of his campaign until after the Trump attempted assassination. Then all of a sudden they allowed him to get Secret Service protection. He also spoke about how the media wouldn't give him access to certain things, and he feels that he was killed on social media. They would just kill his message, or they would kill, and I can sort of attest to that, because on April 1st, and I'll play a little bit of it later, I had Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on this show. And here's a national figure, a national political figure, and it only got 1,000 views. I was baffled by that. And I didn't want to think that perhaps it was killed by the powers that be, that they didn't want that show to get out there. The show wasn't controversial. I wanted him to talk about law and order and how he would differ if he were president in helping the police, and in seeing that the police had the tools they needed to do their job. And, you know, as we could see, now there's a lot of the whole defund the police movement. And I wanted to make sure that he wasn't behind that. So we're going to talk a little about some of these issues today. So hold on to your hats, hold on to your thoughts, hold on to your opinions. I think there'll be lots of different opinions on this one because you're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off the cuff zone, the police off the cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch by Glider.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
You know, folks, a lot of people, again, and I'm not trying, someone said in the chat, since when did this become a political channel? Well, you know, politics and law enforcement go hand in hand. And as I said, I had Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on my show on April 1st. So according to the New York Times, Robert F. Kennedy endorses Trump and suspends his independent bid for president. Mr. Kennedy said that he would remove his name from the ballot in battleground states so as not to be a spoiler. And this is all from the New York Times. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. threw his support behind former President Donald Trump on Friday after suspending his troubled independent campaign for president, saying he was withdrawing his name from the ballot in battleground states and that Mr. Trump had asked to enlist me in his second administration. He announced plans in a speech in Phoenix that also castigated the mainstream media and accused the Democratic Party of abandoning democracy and engaging in legal warfare against him and Mr. Trump. This is, again, coming from the New York Times. Campaigning in Las Vegas, Mr. Trump expressed delight with Mr. Kennedy's decision. That's big, he said. He's a great guy, respected by everybody. On Friday evening, Mr. Kennedy spoke at a rally for Mr. Trump in Arizona. So these issues, again, this race is very close and pretty interesting, though, that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., again, a Democrat, I want to put this on from the endorsement he gave at the rally for Trump, and again, withdrawing from the race. And again, unexpected for everyone that follows politics
of this country. So, Bobby, please say a few words. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you. Now, a few hours after the assassination attempt at Butler, I got a call from a safe food advocate named Kelly Means, who's been fighting for many years to try to end the corruption at CDC and FDA and USDA. And these institutions, these regulatory agencies are actually run by the big food processing companies, the big ag and the chemical companies that they're supposed to regulate. And he said to me that he'd been advising me for many years on my campaign. And he told me that night that he was also advising President Trump. And he asked if I would talk to President Trump. And I said, of course. And about a few minutes later, I got a call from the president. And we talked. We had a very good talk. And then he invited me to come see him the next day. And I went to Minneapolis and saw him. We met again a couple of weeks later in Florida. And we talked about not about the things that separate us because we don't agree on everything, but on the values and the issues that bind us together. And one of the issues that he talked about was having safe food and ending the chronic disease epidemic. Our children are now the unhealthiest, sickest children in the world. Don't you want healthy children? And don't you want the chemicals out of our food? And don't you want the regulatory agencies to be free from corporate corruption? And that's what President Trump told me that he wanted. He also told me that he wanted to end the grip of the neocons on U.S. foreign policy. He said he didn't want any more $200 billion wars in Ukraine, that we could use that money back here in the United States. And the best way to build a safe America is to rebuild our industrial base and rebuild the middle class in this country. And don't you want a president who's going to get us out of the wars and who's going to rebuild the middle class in this country? And he told me that he wanted to end the censorship because the whole basis of American democracy is the free flow of information. And we know that a government that can silence its opponents has license for any kind of atrocity. And can you think of any time that you can look back in history and say that the people who were censoring were the good guys? They're always the bad guys, because it's always the first step down that slippery slope to totalitarianism. And don't you want a president who's going to protect America's freedoms? And who is going to protect us against totalitarianism? And I want to ask you again, don't you want a safe environment for your children? Don't you want to know that the food that you're feeding them is not filled with chemicals that are going to give them cancer and chronic disease? And don't you want a president that's going to make America healthy again? Thank you all very, very much, and God bless you, and God bless America.
So that was his endorsement after he dropped out of the race. And again, I'm not endorsing Trump. I'm not endorsing Robert F. Kennedy. I simply said that I think it's important to have more than a two-party system. And in April 1st of this year, I had Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the Police Off the Cuff show. Actually, I'll pull up a little bit of the show, and here we go.
But also all the police officers who put their lives on the line to protect public safety every day, public safety for the rest of us, and to protect our neighborhoods. I am completely opposed to what we've seen over the past few years, the demonization of police, the defunding of these departments. You know, there are problems in law enforcement. And there are problems with mass incarceration. We need intelligent, reasonable, common sense criminal justice reform. These aren't illusory issues. We now have the largest prison population in the world. It's even larger than China's, which is almost 5 times our population size. We need, and there are issues with encounter, very, very troubling encounters between minorities and police. But we need to deal with those issues in an intelligent, common sense way. And demonizing police officers is not the way to do it. Most police officers are conscientious. They're hardworking. They're there to do what they're supposed to do, which is protect and serve. And I know this from my years as a DA, that it is a very stressful job. It is stressful on their families, their marriages, their bodies, their health. And particularly now we're seeing this rise of in mental illness in our country.
Folks, just so you know, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was a Manhattan assistant district attorney, and I believe it was around 1985. So he did cut his teeth being a prosecutor in the Manhattan DA's office. And of course, I would imagine the legendary DA Robert M. Morgenthau was friends with his family, and he worked for several years as a district attorney. And one of the things he did do in his own private law firm is he's credited with cleaning up the Hudson River with an organization called River Keepers. And what they did was, whenever a business or an organization or a company dumped sludge or illegal materials in the Hudson River, he would sue them. And as a result of that, the Hudson River became one of the cleanest rivers probably in the nation because of the work that he did with his organization called River Keepers. In fact, fish that they hadn't seen in generations came back to the Hudson River and are thriving now. You can see striped bass in the Hudson River. Some people catch striped bass and eat them out of the Hudson River. And that can be attributed to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his law firm and his organization, River Keepers.
And police are not trained to deal with that, and nobody really is well trained to deal with it. And we need to address those specific issues. And you don't do that by demonizing police, and you don't do it by defunding police departments. So I'm completely opposed to those policies.
Bobby, I just want to ask one question, because it seems though that you are for some of these decarceral policies, because I think that's one of the things that most police see as a huge problem, or the fact that district attorneys don't want to prosecute and put people in jail. And you see stores completely closing because of the pet larceny problem, where they just go in and rampantly just empty the store out and there's no consequences for their actions. And I mean, how does capitalism survive with a situation like that?
Yeah, it's insane. Particularly what they've done in San Francisco is just so crazy. I tried Monsanto cases. I tried these 3 big cases against Monsanto, and I think it was 2017, 2018. 2 of them in Oakland, 1 of them in San Francisco. And while I was trying those cases, there's the cases against Roundup for giving non-Hodgkin's lymphoma to people. And so we tried those cases. They each took several weeks. I ended up spending about half the year in San Francisco. Every morning before court, I would go down to Union Square and exercise. There was a gym in Union Square. I'd go there like 5:30 in the morning and work out before I went to court. And Union Square is like in San Francisco, like Fifth Avenue in New York. It has all of the big um, American brands, flagship stores for Gap and for Old Navy and for Nordstrom's and all of the big stores, and then the big international brands like Dealer Valley and Prada and Gucci. They're all there, and Levi. Every big store that you can imagine that you'd see on Fifth Avenue. So I went there about when I started my presidential campaign. I went back to San Francisco, and every one of those stores is closed. These are the flagship stores. People come from all over the world to shop there, from Asia mainly to shop there. They're all closed. It's as if you walk down Fifth Avenue today and there was plywood on every store in Fifth Avenue. That's what it looks like in San Francisco. And the reason for that is this chaos that's happening on the street, and the fact that retail outlets cannot stay open because they're flooded by these gangs, these flash gangs that come in, strip everything off the shelf. And they pass these insane laws in San Francisco that make it virtually impossible to arrest us or to detain a shoplifter. So, and then they got all this other problem with homelessness on the streets, with, just the sanitation is horrible. And San Francisco is shutting down. You see these, the downtown, I think there's a 30% vacancy rate in the office buildings downtown. The shopping areas are all closed. These places were producing tax revenue that kept San Francisco's schools open, that kept the police, education, healthcare, all transportation, everything. And now they don't have those revenue sources anymore. And the entire city is circling a drain. And this is my favorite. I love New York. I grew up in New York. My father was a senator from this state. But I love San Francisco. I love San Francisco. It's such a beautiful city, and I love everything about it. And now it's just a wreck. Nobody wants to go there, and it's because of these just bizarre policies.
Bobby, so then what is the solution? I mean, I came from broken windows policing, and clearly they don't want that anymore, because part of broken windows policing is this criminal justice system hitting on all cylinders, the district attorneys prosecuting, corrections keeping criminals inside, people that get arrested don't get released the same day with bail reform so that they can go out and reoffend. They're back. You remember when you were a DA, getting arrested with an illegal gun was a mandatory year. What happened to that? There's been the guys arrested 3 or 4 times.
My time at the DA's office, I was prosecuting fare beaters in the subway. That's what you start out with. You do, fare beating, prostitution, all these kind of misdemeanor offenses. And because there's a recognition that if you tolerate the broken windows, the fare beating, that it has this cascading effect, where the whole society becomes, less law abiding, and the little crimes lead to larger and larger crimes. So listen, I know that it's not a simple issue, Bill. It's not a binary issue whether you're either for or against it. There are abuses in the bail program. I saw it as a DA that, there are a lot of people who can't afford bail, and a lot of DAs would set the bail super high to get people to plead guilty to crimes for which they weren't guilty. And so it is abused, and we need to recognize that. And those of us like you and me who are well-intentioned, who like common sense, who are reasonable, need to find paths to solving these issues that are not just binary. And I think, we've gone way, way to the extreme side. And then, there's another issue here, which is the social deterioration that we've seen over the past 30 years because of our addiction to these foreign wars, to these forever wars. We've spent $8 trillion on wars over the past 20 years since 2001, and we've gotten nothing for that. Americans are less safe abroad. It's bankrupted us at home. Our moral authority is at zero abroad. Our friendships abroad are virtually gone. We spent $4 trillion on the Iraq War, and what do we get for that? We got, Iraq's worse off than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. Iraq is now a proxy of Iran. The reason the Gaza war happened is because Iraq used to be a bulwark against Iran, and now it's a puppet of Iran. So Iran is now unleashed in the whole region and is funding the Houthis, is funding Hamas, is funding Islamic Jihad, and is funding Hezbollah in Lebanon, because we killed Saddam Hussein, who was the biggest enemy of Iraq. We created ISIS. We drove 4 million refugees up into Europe, where they destabilize every democracy in Europe. Brexit is a direct result of the war in Iraq and the Syrian war that followed. And what do we do here at home? What could we have done with that $8 trillion? We could have invested in our schools. We could have invested in our healthcare system. We now have the sickest population in the world. We could have invested in creating jobs and prosperity and rebuilding our industrial base. And our infrastructure was all neglected. And, the police are shouldering that burden of 20 years of neglect. I tried to hold the whole thing together, instead of a social contract, they're trying to hold it together with law enforcement, and it just doesn't work. It's an impossible task that we're giving them.
Well, Bobby, even the head of the FBI said that this country is in danger based on all of the people that came through the border that were unvetted, unknown, unidentified. And the front line in this next war, which could be a terrorist war, is going to be fought by law enforcement, because these people that have been untracked are all over this country. They're not just in one area. I mean, there's another issue, of course, that we couldn't solve it all on this show.
Well, listen, I've been down to the border in the last couple months 2 times. I spent 3 days in Yuma and then another 2 days in Tucson, and meeting with law enforcement officials, meeting with the Border Patrol, meeting with law enforcement on both sides of the border, also local ranchers, hospital officials, rape center officials. And it's a humanitarian catastrophe that we have started. It's the Biden administration did this. And I'm no fan of Donald Trump, but the day the Biden administration came in, it opened the borders. And we've now had 9 million people come across illegally. 9 million people. I'll tell you, Bill, when I watched, my first night I went to the border just south of Yuma, and I stayed there between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I watched 300 people walk across the border, and they were brought there on big white buses, brand new, by the Sinaloa drug cartel, a Mexican drug cartel. It is now advertising all over the world that it can get anybody they want into the United States for $10,000 or $15,000, depending. And the people fly into Mexico City. The cartels get them an internal visa in Mexico, and they put them on a local flight to Mexicali. The cartels pick them up. There's a parking lot there filled with these big white buses, 55 people on a bus. They bring them up to the border in Yuma, and there's a big hole in the border that was left there because the wall was not completed there. And they just walk across. And what does the Border Patrol do? President Biden got rid of the 2 policies that would have allowed us to keep them out. One is it turned the catch and catch and return policy and adopted instead of catch and release policy. They come across, they all know exactly what's going to happen because they've seen the whole the playbook on their TikToks or YouTube. Where they're and by the way, you think when you think of the border, you think, oh, there are Mexicans coming across, there's people from El Salvador, Honduras, Latin America. No. The whole night, I watched 300 people come across. Only 2 of them were from Latin America. The first 110 were all from West Africa, young men of military age from West Africa. I didn't talk to them because they had already come across and the Border Patrol was processing them. The next groups, I talked to every single person as they came across, like 120 people. And they were from Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. They were from India, Nepal. Most of them were from China. And I asked them, why are you coming here? And they all said, we're coming for jobs. Well, you can't do that. If you want to come for a job, you have to wait in line. The only way legally, but the Border Patrol is told you can't arrest them. There are 9 Border Patrolmen who have killed themselves over the past year because they're so demoralized. They're being told not to do their job. The Border Patrol, when they come across, it fingerprints them. If they do not have a critical record, what happens? The Border Patrol brings them to the Yuma airport and puts them on a plane to any destination they want to go in the United States. They give them a court date for the asylum courts that's 7 years in the future. 7 years. And then they put them on a plane, wherever the person says, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh, New York, Boston, San Francisco, you get a plane. If you don't have the money for that plane ride, which a lot of them don't because the drug cartels rob them before they come across, the Border Patrol, the U.S. Border Patrol, pays for their ticket and then gets reimbursed by FEMA. 9 million people coming across this way. They come to New York, and I can go out on the street right now and see people who are, in that. It's not a good thing for them. They come here, they don't have working papers. They're taken advantage of by predatory employees. Here in New York, the construction firms, some of the unscrupulous ones are hiring them. They pay them $6 an hour, $12, $15 an hour. And that construction firm is competing against a union shop. So it means the union members who would actually bring money into the communities and, who support our communities in Queens and Brooklyn and Staten Island, they're not getting the jobs. It's going to these unscrupulous firms that are employing these. They're not paying them enough to get them off the street, so they're crushing the social service system. The city of New York had to cut police by 5%, healthcare by 5%, transportation, sanitation, all by 5% to pay for this.
I just thought it would be interesting for everyone to watch some of this since he was on my show in April. He's withdrawing out of the race, obviously. He put his support behind Trump. But I wanted to ask him some important questions and questions that I thought were important regarding, since this is a law enforcement show, things like defunding the police, things like decarceral policies. And tell you the truth, he is for a lot of the decarceral policies. So much of his politics is still Democrat politics, and he's liberal in some ways. Who he supports, I mean, I was shocked that he came out and supported Trump, since he's from a family of such prominent Democrats. To see that he did endorse Donald Trump was nothing less than shocking to me. And again, this is not a political show. I'm not endorsing Trump. I'm not endorsing Kennedy. I'm not endorsing Harris. I'm just pointing these things out to you. And the fact that, again, we live in interesting times. Yes, you can look at policies. a lot of my policies, of course, I want support for law enforcement. I don't want to defund the police. I don't want decarceral policies. I want public safety. Those are the things that I'm big with. So I don't, look, you can like Kennedy, you can hate him. His voice is tough to listen to. Agreed. It's very tough. He had some issue with but he is, as Dawn Marie says in the chat, I'll tell you right now, he is a brilliant guy. He's really smart. In fact, I don't know him personally. I met him once, many, many, many years ago. Broke Woke, thank you to $5 super sticker. 2 men putting their differences aside for the people. Yes, I mean, I met him many, many years ago at Croton Point Park, and I was with my kids. Well, actually, my one son. My other son wasn't even born yet. And he was going through the Hudson River with a net and pulling out hundreds of fish, showing how the fish in the river were thriving because of his lawsuits against these companies that were dumping toxic materials into the Hudson River. And in 10 or 15 years, the river was almost totally cleaned up. Folks, again, this is Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. If you're not subscribed, just hit that subscribe button on this on the screen. If you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 4 different levels, and we also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels, and you can support us that way. He's from a very political family, and I think in most of his ideology and most of his thoughts and most of his politics, I believe he still is Democrat based. I'm going to play a little bit of his speech when he withdrew.
Disease, free speech, government corruption, breaking our addiction to war have moved to the center of politics. I can say to all who have worked so hard the last year and a half, thank you for a job well done. 3 great causes drove me to enter this race in the first place, primarily. And these are the principal causes that persuaded me to leave the Democratic Party and run as an independent. And now to throw my support to President Trump. The causes were free speech, a war in Ukraine, and the war on our children. I've already described some of my personal experiences and struggles with the government's censorship industrial complex. I want to say a word about the Ukraine war. The military industrial complex has provided us with a familiar comic book justification, like they do on every war, that this one is a noble effort to stop a supervillain, Vladimir Putin, invading the Ukraine and then to thwart his Hitler-like march across Europe. In fact, tiny Ukraine is a proxy in a geopolitical struggle initiated by the ambitions of the U.S. neocons or American global hegemony. I'm not excusing Putin for invading Ukraine. He had other options. But the war is Russia's predictable response to the reckless neocon project of extending NATO to encircle Russia, a hostile act. The credulous media rarely explain to Americans that we unilaterally walked away from 2 intermediate nuclear weapons treaties with Russia and then put nuclear-ready Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland. This is a hostile act. And that the Biden White House repeatedly spurned Russia's offer to settle this war peacefully. The Ukraine war began in 2014 when U.S. agencies overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine and installed a hand-picked pro-Western government that launched a deadly civil war against ethnic Russians in Ukraine. In 2019, America walked away from a peace treaty, the Minsk Agreement, that had been negotiated between Russia and Ukraine by European nations. And then in April of 2022, we wanted the war. In April of 2022, President Biden sent Boris Johnson to Ukraine to force President Zelensky to tear up a peace agreement that he and the Russians had already signed, and the Russians were withdrawing troops from Kiev and Donbass and Lugansk. And that peace agreement would have brought peace to the region and would have allowed Donbass and Lugansk to remain part of Ukraine. President Biden stated that month that his objective in the war was regime change in Russia. His Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, simultaneously explained that America's purpose in the war was to exhaust the Russian army, to degrade its capacity to fight anywhere else in the world. These objectives, of course, have nothing to do with what they were telling Americans about protecting Ukraine's sovereignty. Ukraine is a victim in this war, and it's a victim of the West. Since then, of Russia and both Russia and the West. Since then, we have, since tearing up that agreement, forcing Zelensky to tear up the agreement, we've squandered the flower of Ukrainian youth, as many as 600,000 Ukrainian kids and over 100,000 Russian kids, all of whom we should be mourning, have died, and the Ukraine's infrastructure is destroyed. The war has been a disaster for our country as well. We squandered nearly $200 billion already, and these are badly needed dollars in our communities, suffering communities all over our country. The Nord Stream pipeline sabotage and the sanctions have destroyed Europe's industrial base, which formed the bulwark of U.S. national security. A strong Germany with a strong industry is a much, much stronger deterrent to Russia, and a Germany that is deindustrialized and turned into just an extension of a U.S. military base. We've pushed Russia into a disastrous alliance with China and Iran. We're closer to the brink of nuclear exchange than at any time since 1962. And the neocons in the White House don't seem to care at all. Our moral authority and our economy are in shambles. And the war gave rise to the emergence of BRICS, which now threatens to replace the dollar as the global reserve currency. This is a first-class calamity for our country.
So I'm hoping you got just a feel of what RF Kennedy Jr. was about. Obviously, we started this show to talk about that he has withdrawn from the race and he has thrown his support behind Donald Trump. Whether that helps Trump or not, hurts Trump, I don't know. I'm not that educated in the political process to know the result of the polls. But I thought it was important to take a look at Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his position on law enforcement. He says he was a Manhattan district attorney. He was on my show, although about only 1,000 people watched it, which I was shocked. A national figure, and only about 1,000 people watched it. So again, this is not a political show. This is a true crime show. But I felt that I couldn't ignore this, of course, since Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was on my show. He was a former Manhattan district attorney. He could also wind up in politics again, in potentially a cabinet position, depending on what happens. And if you remember, his father, Robert F. Kennedy, was the Attorney General under President John F. Kennedy. So whether that could ever happen again, I don't know. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this afternoon show. Again, as I thought, an important topic. But I want everyone to have a wonderful weekend and be safe, and God bless everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.